like to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphones today are Operations Assistant Micah Tedeschi and Director of Development Jessica Leary-Allen. Now, first question, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Rahall.
Yes.
What legislation have you sponsored that will help to make us more energy independent?
Well, there are a number of pieces of legislation over the times that I've been in the Congress. The most recent, I would say, would be the coal to liquid legislation that I and Representative Jeff Davis of Kentucky in a bipartisan fashion introduced at the start of this Congress. Over in the Senate, the same legislation was introduced by Senator Jim Bunning of Kentucky and Barack Obama of Illinois. This legislation would provide for incentives from the government to the private sector to help develop these plants. It wouldn't be an outright grant, but only when the price of oil would reach certain levels, of which it's long surpassed that level we originally envisioned. Then there would be price triggers set in by the government at which they would help the private sector invest in this type of technology. We know the technology is there. We know it's expensive. We know the private sector won't do it by itself because of the financial fears of not making it or oil coming back down. But today, certainly, I don't think oil's going to come back down to those levels when we first introduced the bill even, which may have been around $40 or $50 a barrel. So it is economic feasible, in our opinion, for this legislation to pass today, but it faces a great deal of opposition, and I don't refer just to the environmental community. It faces opposition from other domestic energy resources, quite honestly. Again, it's not looking at the entire picture in a comprehensive way, but each segment looking after their bottom line called profits. So that's one piece. Legislation, and we're following that up now as I speak and getting ready to introduce a more specific bill that provides a tax on the industry then, the coal industry, which they're willing to do, and have helped write the bill to provide these incentives, set up a fund to invest in coal to liquid technology. Over the years, I've also been very active in energy legislation that has passed the House that would set up a regime by which our windmill industry would be regulated, but not over-regulated, but at least a standard set that they must meet before installing a wind farm. Environmental standards, private property protection rights, etc. And that has worked its way into an energy bill that comprehensive, well, not really comprehensive, but an energy bill that passed the House, but it has not seen the light of day in the other body. So there are a number of issues addressing domestic production of energy that I've co-sponsored over the years.
Congressman?
Yes, sir.
I'm Charlie Clark. I'm Executive Director of the Defense Minerals Technology Center in Canton. And I'd like to draw your attention to infrastructure issues, if I could divert you a little bit. Our mission to try to solve problems for the Army in metals, special metals, particularly titanium. You may have noticed today in the plain dealer we had a bridge failure here right down on the river. We have an initiative to look at the possibility of titanium being used in rehabbing the bridge inventory as opposed to steel. Titanium does not corrode or rust, as you probably know. Would you comment on the whole bridge problem and what your take is with this fast question regarding maybe looking at some better solution to the problems?
The Transportation and Infrastructure Committee is my other committee.
I know, sir.
And I'm vice chairman of that committee. Chairman Jim Overstar of Minnesota chairs that committee, and as you know, the terrible Minnesota bridge collapse is in his home state. I don't know the figures off the top of my head, but suffice it to say we're in a terribly underfunded situation nationwide when it comes to the money that's needed to address all our deficient bridges. It's another disaster waiting to happen, unfortunately, and pray to God it never does. But we definitely are lacking in our infrastructure needs in this country. The Highway Trust Fund revenues are declining. That is the fund derived from the gas taxes, federal gas tax. That is the traditional way that we, through that fund, pay for maintaining our current interstate system, bridge replacement program, bridge maintenance program, a host of other programs that are under that. It's more than just highway trust fund anymore. It's intermodal type of transportation modes. And as far as our bridges and the use of titanium, I think that very much should be on the table. I don't want to offend my friends in the steel industry in any regard, but I think, in a competitive world, in a competitive fashion, it should be there. And as we reauthorize the Federal Aid to Transportation Bill during the year 09, we've already had hearings on that process, and it'll pick up in next year, probably more so in 09. As Mary Rose knows, we never get anything done on time, so I don't know when we'll reauthorize that bill. But that certainly, I think, should be an option available, again, in a competitive fashion. If it works better and less cost, and go for it.
We'll come and see.
Okay.
Congressman Rahall, you spoke at great length about the negatives about using ethanol as an alternative method of fuel, both the environment and, more important, to the food supply of the world. Yet at the same time, you mentioned that our government is spending billions of dollars to support that program of using ethanol. You also told of some of the legislation that you've introduced over the years, which I think is very commendatory on the environment. Would you be willing to take the responsibility of going back to Washington and introducing legislation to end our massive subsidy of the ethanol, the coal, the corn industry, of using those foods for fuel, and perhaps instead use some of that money for a real crash program to develop some alternative sources of energy?
Well, while I'm certainly supportive of that goal, I don't want to shut the door completely to any future use of any of our domestic resources, of which ethanol is one of those. If we can find a way to make it less reliant upon corn, for example, which if technology is there or the studies are there to point that may be possible, I don't want to shut that door completely. Again, I don't mind developing ethanol as long as it doesn't drive up the price of our food. I'm also politically cognizant of where this is an important issue, and it happens to be in the Midwest, where there's a state called Iowa that's very early in the primary season for every presidential election campaign. So let's be political realists about it. And I would agree more with the latter part of your question, of course, that a crash program is needed for development of our other alternative fuels. And, Senator Rockefeller of my state has called it a Marshall Plan is needed for development of coal-to-liquid technologies, for example, that I've already discussed. So I don't want to shut the door completely and put a nail in it to future possibilities.